I tell you guys, sound bites, snapshots, that's all this world's really about anymore. Does anyone want context? Like, does anyone really want to listen to someone's thoughts beginning to end and then formulate an opinion? I don't know. Late Kick on the air here. It's May 9th, the year of our Lord 2024, jam-packed high atop downtown Austin, Texas. We're at the University of Texas, as represented in this beautiful mural behind me. We got Steve Sarkeesian on the show for, what, Greg, like 43 minutes tonight. So we've got a lot to talk about with the head coach at Texas, but I've got a lot to get to even before that. This whole Brian Kelly thing, fortunately, we had a couple of days between the time the soundbite aired that everyone's talking about and the time that I had my next show, which is good because I had time to ask what the real problem was with what he said, since so many people were been out of shape about it. I'll give you some thoughts in a second. We got some transfer portal stuff. Of course, it's bold prediction season, and so we're going to get 4 brand new bold predictions from you tonight. Some of them are very bold, like in the 9+ boldness range. And as I said, Steve Sarkeesian, one-on-one, we're going to go all over the place with the head coach at Texas, maybe even weighing in on gas station recruiting wars. They're watching us in Joplin, Missouri, Galveston, Texas, Cuthbert, Georgia, and Detroit, Michigan. We have been on the road for a variety of different reasons. This spring, we're on the road at all the big-time programs in the country, sitting down with the biggest head coaches in the country. We've had storm chasing going on. A lot of that doesn't make it on the show. At Late Kick Josh. If you want to catch all that stuff, especially the Instagram story, at Late Kick Josh, we had a whole lot going on this week. And I appreciate you guys. Because of you, we can essentially make all that possible. Okay, so let's dive into this thing. I thought it best that we wait until today's show, so Thursday, to talk about this. So Brian Kelly is making a lot of headlines right now because Brian Kelly sat down with Jacques Doucet, and Jacques Doucet is a staple around the Louisiana sports scene, and he sat down with Brian Kelly the same way we would kind of sit down with head coaches, one-on-one, long-form talk and conversation. Well, the thing about those is a lot of times people don't want to listen to the whole thing. And especially in Brian Kelly's case, when he says something like we're about to play for you in a second, it gets clipped, and I'm going to let you decide whether it was taken out of context, because on the back end of this, you and I will talk. I'll tell you what I think. But if you missed it, out of a very long-form conversation that Brian Kelly had with Jacques Doucet earlier this week, this was the part that really made headlines.
I think I made it pretty clear in a number of the press conferences that I had that we were in the market in recruiting in the transfer portal looking for defensive linemen. It hasn't fared very well, quite frankly, because we're selling something a little bit differently, and that is we want to recruit, we want to engage, build relationships, we want to develop, retain, and have success. We're not in the market of buying players, and unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They want to be bought. And look, I understand NIL is part of this, and we have an incredible collective. We have very, very generous opportunities around the greater Baton Rouge area for NIL opportunities. So they are here. But we're not going to go out and buy players. That's not what this is about. This was never about that. We will develop you. We will get you ready for the next step, as we did with Jaden Daniels, as we did with Malik Neighbors, as we did with Brian Thomas. We developed 3 defensive linemen that all got drafted this year, and we'll do that again. But if you're just looking to get paid, you're looking in the wrong place.
So that got passed around, and a lot of people listened to that. A lot of people had opinions. So I noticed that was gaining some steam the other day, and I thought to myself, I'm going to have to talk about this on the show. But before I do, because we're rarely in a position where I have a solid 24 to 36 hours to gather other opinions in the space, I just asked you guys. I put it out on Twitter. I said, hey, before I touch on this on the Thursday night show, for those of you who had a problem with what Brian Kelly said, could you just tell me what your problem was? Be specific. And so I combed through thousands of responses, and I noticed either you didn't have a problem with it, or some of you just don't like Brian Kelly, so you have a problem when he breathes. Those replies notwithstanding, I noticed that a lot of you who kind of got into the weeds of your feelings a little bit, you told me that you thought he was lying. basically a lot of you, hundreds out of the thousands of replies, just said, I dislike what he said there because I think he's lying. And what you meant by that, in not so many words, is you thought that it was sour grapes. A lot of you think that they didn't land Dom Williams. And the context, for those unfamiliar, by the way, is LSU is perilously thin on the defensive line. They are not SEC caliber, high-level SEC caliber on the defensive line, specifically the interior. They know that, and they've been in the market for defensive line help in the transfer portal, and they swung and missed on some big names. One of them was Dominic Williams. Kid just left TCU. He goes to Oklahoma, as it turns out, and LSU wanted him bad. They didn't land him. A lot of you are theorizing that Brian Kelly, after they took their big swing and didn't land him, is singing this tune because it sounds a lot better than "We Whiffed," which is fair. Now, I can't know that. I can't know the guy's heart. But if that is what he's doing, okay, totally fair opinion. That wouldn't be the first time, by the way, that this has happened. It wouldn't be the first time that a coach has taken a moral soapbox out about the greater good of athletics and how development should be prioritized over a payday when they didn't land the guy they wanted. It's happened before. I don't know that that's happening here. It's happened before. There's a bigger picture thing in play. Okay, so I thought Matt Moscano did a really good job of summarizing this when he was talking about it down in the Louisiana market earlier this week. And he essentially did something that's pretty rare. He listened to the whole interview. He gathered all the context involved. And all the context involved, I think, is important here. So Brian Kelly said something that had Kirby Smart said it, I think a lot of people would cheer. Kirby Smart could say it because Kirby Smart believes in the same philosophy Brian Kelly believes in. The difference is a lot more of you trust Kirby Smart. A lot more of you put Kirby Smart on a pedestal and everything that comes out of his mouth is gold because that guy has the #1 program in college football right now, which is true. Guys, they practice the exact same thing at Georgia that Brian Kelly articulated at LSU. The difference is LSU as a program is not where Georgia is. And so when Brian Kelly says something from the LSU podium, you view it through a little different prism than you do the way you used to view Saban when he said stuff, or the way you view Kirby Smart right now when he says stuff. But I'm always a big believer in, going back to like the Attitude Era of Monday Night Raw, back when Kane still had a mask on because he was a burn victim and he had to talk with a voice modulator. Just do that to the coach, okay? So forget about the face. Put a mask on Brian Kelly. Put the Kane mask on Brian Kelly. Give Brian Kelly the Kane voice modulator where you can't tell it's Brian Kelly talking. Or let's put a Kirby Smart mask on Brian Kelly. And let's modulate Kelly's voice to be that of Kirby Smart. And have him say the exact same thing. I guarantee a lot of people would listen to it and say, heck yeah, go Dogs. That's the way it's done. That's how a winner talks. They ain't got to buy championships. You're right. Georgia doesn't have to buy championships. It has been pretty common knowledge in the NIL space. Saban at Bama, Ryan Day in Ohio State, believe it or not, until about 5 minutes ago. Kirby Smart in Georgia, they've been lower bidders. They've been on the low end of the bidding. And the reason is pretty obvious. The trade-off is we're going to offer you less money, but in return, you get to play at Georgia. You get to be developed at Alabama. You get to reap the benefits of playing at Ohio State. We're going to be in the hunt every year. We're littering the NFL draft with guys every year. And so think about a 40-year decision instead of a 4-month decision. Well, Brian Kelly wants that message to sell at LSU. And in time, maybe it will. But it's not going to sell with everyone. Georgia doesn't land everyone they want to. Georgia loses kids to bidding wars all the time. It's not because Georgia can't afford it. Georgia's not a poverty program, nor is LSU. I think, again, Matt Moscano did a really good job on the ground, right there, rubbing elbows with the program and knowing a lot of people internally that run these sorts of things about the situation they were in financially a year ago, collective-wise, and the situation they're in now. It's not that you can't afford him, but Brian Kelly, in some of the parts of that interview that weren't heard nationally, started talking about what he's responsible for. Yeah, you're responsible for going and trying to get the best players that you can to fit your program, but also Brian Kelly's got this entire thing. It's called a locker room, and this entire thing called culture and a dynamic that he's got to worry about. And so Brian Kelly looks and he's saying, now hold on a second. On one hand, we can afford to go land this guy. We could afford it. I mean, it's a 7-figure deal probably, but we have that money. However, I've also got a locker room that I'm accountable to. And what happens to that C word, that culture, if I go and I take a kid from TCU, no one here knows him, and I take him and I put him in my locker room, and he's now making more than everybody in there. Everybody, in some cases, that committed to LSU out of high school and have worked their way up here, and they project as future first rounders. I'm thinking about 2 tackles in particular. How do they look at a guy coming in here who immediately makes more than them? Now, in Xbox land, you don't have to think that way. A head coach does. So that's the way I viewed it. Now, there are other viewpoints out there that aren't invalidated per se. Like if you look at this situation and you say, hey, the reality of the times are that you're going to have to go and you're going to have to pay money for big time talent if you want it. That's not false. That's not false. I'm not calling anyone a liar who says that, but I'm also not going to demonize Brian Kelly. Okay, just because some folks don't like him personally, or some folks don't think that they're going to win a lot of games this year because of their situation at D tackle, you cannot let your circumstances compromise what your overall vision of your program is supposed to be. It could just be they're going to be thin on defensive line this year. It could just be that. Are you willing to risk compromising some of your principles in exchange for, rolling the dice? He wasn't willing to. That's really the long and short of it. But I'm telling you this, like as everyone else was talking about Brian Kelly and boy, how he's failing his team or how he's making excuses on the back end. I thought about his locker room. I thought about how I'd feel if I were one of his higher level players, maybe one of those offensive tackles. And I looked publicly at my head coach saying, essentially, yeah, we could have gone and gotten this guy, but we didn't. We chose not to, and we chose not to because it would have meant affecting me. If I'm one of those kids listening, affecting me. Well, we may not be as talented a football team as we would have been had we landed that kid, but I'm LSU. I should be talented enough already. And we should, if I'm on that team, I'm looking around at my guys in the locker room thinking, we got the guys here we already need to compete. And that dude thinks so as well. That's why he made the decision he made. Whether that ends up being right or wrong, that's how I feel if I were in the LSU locker room. So it was one of those cases where a lot of people were up in arms about something. That's the crime of saying something in May, by the way. Everything gets twisted like that. But I don't think you're wrong if you try and state what reality is. One of the problems I have with the NIL world right now is there are people who want to say something provocative so bad. They want to make this profound statement so bad. So when Kelly says what he says, they think that they are intellectually flying at a different level in the room when they go to Twitter and they talk about how, well, this is the way of the world. This is reality right now. Like we all don't get that. Like Brian Kelly doesn't get that. He gets it 10 times more than you do. He's involved in it. It's just that that's not their belief system. It's not how he wanted to go about it. So you can either think that's idealistic, or you can think that if you believe in that, it's just believing in BS. I don't think it is, guys. If it was BS, they wouldn't feel the same way at other successful programs, is all I'm saying. So does LSU match what Georgia's doing right now? No, they don't. I'm at Texas right now. Sark, when he first got here, actually, he's going to talk later in the show about this, about how you can either cut corners to go get guys, or you can have foundational principles and you don't sacrifice those for talent. And it may mean in the short term your depth chart suffers, but in the long term your culture will be better off for believing that way. I believe in that. I believe in that. I don't know what LSU will look like this fall, but I believe if Brian Kelly just operates from a broad-based perspective that way, overall LSU football will be better for that. That's how I view the situation. Happy to have you guys with us, man. We got a jam-packed show. We've been on the road all spring. It's the first time we've ever done the show from Austin, from the University of Texas. Been here, but haven't done the show from here. So we really appreciate it. Like I said, I got Sark on the show later tonight, and it's going to be very good because he went all over the place. All over the place. We talked about Texas depth. We talked about Saban retiring. We talked about his own personal journey. We talked about the plight of G5 coaches. We talked about gas station recruiting wars. We talked about everything. So that'll be a little bit later in the show. In the meantime, Colin, don't clip this part when we do the individual segment. But I don't know if you guys have noticed, Brandon Marcello's taking a lot of heat right now. So Brandon Marcello, for my money, is one of the best people covering the sport at a national level that there is right now. He used to, when I was down in Columbus, Brandon was at Auburn. He was covering Auburn. And so as I came here, Brandon kind of also came here. And so, you know, our paths kind of mirrored each other, only he's on the written side, I'm on the commentary side. But Marcelo does a ton of really good stuff. I say that because he did something yesterday that caught a lot of people off guard. He put out his top 30 and didn't put Notre Dame in it, which I think is borderline psychotic, but that's okay. He has his reasons. But the thing about a ranking is it's a ranking. I got the JP poll in the fall. I had Washington out of the top 10 until like 5 minutes before they played a national title last year. It doesn't make you an idiot. It just means maybe you've got something a lot of people disagree with. But I'll tell you what Brandon Marcelo does that I do agree with, a lot of really good reporting. Okay, so now here's the end point, Colin. That's kind of the preface to the following. Brandon Marcelo did a really good feature on the coaching carousel and what college football is right now. And I got to talk to you guys about this for a couple of minutes. Do you realize what just happened? Like, do you guys realize what we just went through? You know, it was crazy. Yeah. How crazy was it? Okay, so listen to these numbers. We got 31 new head coaches in college football this year. That's a record. 1 in 3 coaches changed jobs this past cycle, which is insane. I'll get back to that in a second. The longest tenured head coaches in 4 conferences said, adios, goodbye. 4 head coaches left to become assistants. Another headline we used to hardly ever hear. So I got to dive in on one of these stats. 1 out of 3 coaches in college football changed jobs this past cycle. Are you kidding me? I try and sit on this show, and I try and propagate the messaging that I think is what's best for college football. And that is, man, players don't need to be moving as much as they are. Sure, you should have the right to, but you guys need to learn a little something about endurance and about commitment and all this. And then how am I supposed to preach that message when I got 33% of the professionals in the sport doing the exact same thing? And not all of you are moving for career advancement. Let's just be real. So I look at that and I say, like, are you kidding me? You guys have no leg to stand on. I know it's not an apples to apples comparison. I've talked about this many times on this show. The status of a coach who is an employee, who is under contract, who has to pay a penalty, technically, if he leaves a contract early in the form of a buyout, that is not the same as a player. I get all that. You know as well as I do, people don't even care to have that context thrown at them. Broad strokes purposes, if you guys are moving around as much as you are, you cannot possibly expect players not to see that and say, well, if they can do it, why shouldn't I be able to do it? And you know what? I'm sitting over here as an unbiased third party saying, yeah, you kind of got a point. I hate it, but you kind of got a point. Secondly, in the form of head coaching turnover, it's the most we've seen in a decade. I think it was 31. Yeah, I got it right here. 31 new head coaches. That's a record. Is that an anomaly or is that a trend? I wonder. So I've had a theory that as we enter the NIL era, which affords you the ability to do what Kirk Cignetti is doing at Indiana right now, which is overturning your entire roster basically overnight. Deion Sanders, a really extreme example, but an example of what's technically possible. You take a new job today, you can overhaul a huge chunk of your roster. It doesn't take 3 years anymore. Fans know that. You're paid more than you've ever been paid before. Fans know that. And also, there's an expanded playoff now, which means the bar is lower in terms of what it takes to be a playoff caliber program. So in other words, if you get a new job and you're not doing that pretty quickly because you're able to build your roster overnight and there's a bigger playoff pool, therefore it should be easier to get the spot. If you're not doing that in the first couple of years, you're more likely to be fired. Shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. So I wonder, will we see a trend instead of just a one-year anomaly of more head coaches being fired? Also, I need to remind you, continuity, it's always mattered. It always will matter. 8 of the last 10 college football playoff national champions returned a head coach and both coordinators. 8 of the past 10. So you can quickly look around this year and you can see Oregon does that. Clemson, Florida State, and Miami all do that. Florida, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, they all do that. That's not an exhaustive list. Half of the top 12 teams in the college football playoff odds return a head coach, an offensive coordinator, and a defensive coordinator. What does it mean? maybe nothing, but history says that means a whole heck of a lot. So I would encourage you guys, go to 247sports.com. That piece, I think, is still able to be found over there. Marcelo did really good work. I'm going to tell myself that he did such good work on that feature that he was distracted and forgot to put Notre Dame in his top 30. And then he just got backed into a corner and had to defend himself. That's what I'm going to tell myself. And if I'm wrong, he doesn't even need to bother texting me because I want to defend him in his good name. Academy Sports and Outdoors, you know what? Academy Sports and Outdoors has us covered all year, okay? So I always have reason to sing their praises. And academy.com is where you can go if you can't get there in person. I'm in the state of Texas right now, which means I could throw a rock out of this window and hit like 4 academies. But I know some of you may not be in as advantaged a position, so academy.com has you covered. But if you are a school teacher, they really got you covered. So right now, I think it's through May 11th, Academy giving you an additional 10% off. You just bring that work ID to an Academy store. If you're a teacher, we got you covered. And secondly, if you've ever perused the aisles of an Academy, there's a lot of stuff in there that goes really well in the classroom. Now, if you're like me, if you're like the folks who love this show, we live for Saturdays, which is good because Academy has you covered on Saturdays as well. Grills, canopies, tents, chairs, coolers, etc. So Academy, Sports and Outdoors, one-stop shop for almost every bit of your living essentials and needs. If you're a teacher, especially, now's your time to get there. We appreciate them so much for making the show free and possible. Bold prediction season. Yes, I don't wear a watch, but when I check it, anyway, it's bold prediction season. So here's how this works. In bold prediction season, we don't get predictions from me. I wait until August to give you my predictions. Instead, I put out the call to you guys. On Twitter, I put it out, at Late Kick Josh. It's still there. And I asked, what are the boldest things that you believe will happen this year that you'd be willing to put money on? Now, I can't prove that you guys would actually bet this. So it's just the old honor system. You claim that you would bet these things. So here we go. First bold prediction. Georgia beats Clemson. First bold prediction here. Georgia beats Clemson by 28 or more. And this is a week 1 game. So to set the stage, this is one of those kickoff games on a neutral field. It's in Atlanta, if you want to call that neutral. But really it is here because Clemson and Georgia are both like well within driving distance of Atlanta. So it's not a massive advantage for either team. Maybe slightly to Georgia. Georgia right now at FanDuel, a 13.5-point favorite. Okay, so we have numbers on this game. So Georgia winning by 28 or more. I think that's about an 8.25 on the boldness scale. Clemson hasn't been beaten this soundly since 2013. So it's been over a decade since Clemson lost a game by 4 touchdowns or more. What would have to happen here? Well, obviously, you got to have the game get pretty sideways. Carson Beck goes off. Clemson's offense stalls, or maybe they're turnover prone like they were in week 1 last year against Duke. But with Georgia, you got to be careful here because in those week 1 games, we don't have to go back too far. That Oregon game 2 years ago, 49-3, just a total splattering. The Sarah McLachlan special of week 1 was Georgia versus Oregon. Georgia also, according to Stats and Info, beat 4 ranked teams by 28 plus last year alone. So it's in their blood. It's in their DNA to seek blood. And it could happen. Now, if there's a team out there that's going to annihilate you on national television and expose you in front of the world, it would be Georgia in week 1. Having said that, Clemson's a really good team, man. It's a really big deal that Georgia's favored by 13.5 against Clemson. Program-wise, Clemson is not a dog of that caliber very often. The other thing to think about, though, if we want to get morbid for just a second, if this happens, if Clemson goes down like 42-13 or something like that in week 1, do you understand the kinds of conversations that would be surrounding that program? And by the way, if anyone just tuned in like right now to the show, that's not a prediction from me. I'm responding to a prediction, but the prediction is Georgia beats Clemson by 28 plus. And I'm saying, hey, I don't think that's going to happen. If it does happen, oh, how uncomfortable does that get? Because, hey, Clemson's one of those teams bringing back head coach, both coordinators and quarterback. That should be ingredients, along with upgrading at the wide receiver position, which I believe they have, for kind of being shot out of a cannon in week 1. And instead, if the cannon is shot at you and you just get turned into street pizza, that's not a good thing. So I'm going to say 8.25 because it's Georgia. I give them that much respect. They actually could pull it off. It's an 8.25 on the boldness scale. Next up, Let's go down to South Florida for a second. I'm sure that the comment section will be totally respectful and logical on this one. How about Miami? Bold prediction. They just flat out win the college football playoff. Miami wins a national championship. Well, this is a 9.5 on the boldness scale. It's really, really hard to win a national title. Even if you're a favorite, it's really hard to win a national title. Miami's not favored to win the national title. So what does the FanDuel situation look like with them? Well, they've got the third best odds to win the ACC. They've got around the 19th best odds to win the college football playoff right now. So that's kind of a long shot, but it also suggests they've got a puncher's chance at it. It's a 9.5 to me because of how hard it is to make the playoff and to win it the first year you've made it. And that's in the 4-team era. Okay, so the 12-team era is going to require you to make the playoff, which in this staff's case, and this team's case, would be for the first time. Also, it would be Miami's first time in the nationally relevant spotlight in quite a while. And then they'd be asked to go win 3 or 4 games in the playoffs. And it's just that kind of rarefied air, man. It's hard to breathe that for a long time. It's like the first time climbing Everest. Like, it's just, there's a lot of stuff you're experiencing for the first time. Now, how could they do it? Well, the way they could do it is Cam Ward ends up panning out and being an elite quarterback. Because if he is as good as he could be, they could have the best quarterback situation in the ACC. They could have one of the best offensive line situations in the ACC. They've got a receiver room that, if Cam Ward is who he is, could really light things up in the ACC. Damian Martinez, they just went and got the running back from Oregon State. They've got both coordinators and head coach back. There are paths where Miami, that over-under win total 9.5, where they go over that this year. I'm just saying, if we're talking percentages, it's one thing for Miami to win 10 games, which would be a great year. It's another thing for them to win 10-plus games, go win the ACC, and then go knock off several teams in playoff games and win a national title in 1 year. That's tough. It's doable, but it's tough. So that's a 9.5. Next up, this one's a little more fun. Still bold here, but we're going out to a rarely visited corner of the college football universe. We're going to Lubbock, Texas. Bold prediction: Texas Tech wins the Big 12 this fall. Well, I'm going to put a 9.25 on the boldness scale. It's bold, but it's the Big 12, as Dan Hawkins once told us. It's the Big 12. He said it for a much different reason. It ain't intramurals. It's the Big 12. Yeah, it's the Big 12, which basically just translates to anything can happen, literally. And now Texas and OU are out of the conference, so the odds board's crazy. A bunch of teams within reach that like reasonably could have a shot to upset the apple cart and win it. So then we start to look at schedule. How could Texas Tech pull this thing off? Well, they avoid 4 of the top 5 odds teams in the Big 12. Doesn't mean anything, especially when the odds are that tightly compacted. All I'm trying to do in May is give you a really, really broad sense of what the strength of schedule is. They don't play the toughest strength of schedule in the world. You remember last year, Oklahoma State had a really good draw. Well, this year, Texas Tech's got a pretty good draw. They've got to keep their quarterback healthy. You talk to Joey McGuire, one of the first things he'll say is, I don't think I've ever had a year where I had to play this many quarterbacks and had this much upheaval because of injury in the quarterback room as I did last year. Well, if they avoid that this year, hey, things could happen. Now, what would concern me and what makes this prediction so bold, I'm going to make it a 9.25 on the boldness scale, if I didn't already say that, is defensively they were kind of middle of the pack in the conference last year and they lost a lot of production. So I do wonder, can you just go outscore everyone and do that en route to a conference title? I don't doubt you could upset people doing that, but can you do that en route to a conference title? But I always come back to this. I literally have this written on the piece of paper in front of me. It's the Big 12. Okay, this right here, if it's going to happen, it happens in the Big 12. And Joey McGuire and company, they've got really good energy out there. All you need to do is check his Twitter account to know they've got facility enhancements happening day over day. I think that guy is working part-time construction. The head coach at Texas Tech could very well be coming to work with a hard hat, but not metaphorically. I really do think the guy is spending his mornings on the construction site. And you know what? If he is, more power to him. It's something I've done in the past. I don't wish to do it in the future. And I have immense respect for you guys who do work in that industry because I've been there before. Sheetrockers. You want to learn about life? Hang out with the sheetrockers. If you are young and impressionable and you have temporarily walked away from college because you need to figure yourself out, let me tell you how to get back in school. Go hang out with the sheetrockers on construction sites, because your boy did that. I was working in AC installation in summer in Georgia, but I was always close by with the sheetrockers. Sheetrockers are like pirate captains. They are their own world. People who hang sheetrock are awesome, but they are totally unique to any other group of people in any other profession in the world. The insights that you will get from sheetrockers are mind-blowing, and they will put your jaw on the ground unlike anything else that you've ever gotten. So anyway, I don't know how I went from Texas Tech to sheetrocking, but somehow it all made sense in my mind. Last bold prediction here. Let's keep in mind the new climate we're in, okay? 2 undefeateds will play in the national title game this year. Well, I'm going to put a 9.5 as a boldness scale on that. Now, you think to yourself, if you're following the sport closely, Josh, that's dumb. Why would you say this is so bold when 4 of the last 6 title games featured undefeated teams squaring off? Well, friend, a couple of reasons. And they all both have to do with expansion. Conferences have expanded, and the playoff has expanded. So here's why I think that makes it a whole lot less likely undefeated teams are going to face off in the national title game. Your national championship teams are most likely coming from the SEC or the Big Ten. Statistically, that's where they're most likely to come from, okay? The SEC just expanded again, and the conference schedule got that much tougher again. Big Ten, ditto. So those schedules have been made all the more difficult. Therefore, it's a lot more likely that even the teams making it out of those conferences aren't coming out unscathed. And then you have an expanded playoff. So you would think maybe, okay, but it doesn't matter how big the field is. Like if undefeated teams get in the playoff, they're going to be undefeated throughout the playoff if they keep winning their games. That's not what I mean. What I mean is how many 2-loss teams that could get red hot at the end of the year are going to end up making it into the playoff that otherwise never would have had a shot, and they end up making a run in the playoff. Like the LSU situation last year is the classic example. Several Alabama teams in years past that just missed out on the playoff. Georgia this past year, okay, if we had a 12-team playoff, is in the tournament, and they may go on to win the whole thing. Will that be a 1-loss team? That kind of scenario is more likely now. So expansion, for several reasons, has made this less likely. Also, every SEC team faces at least 3 top 25 college football playoff teams this year. The SEC is going to spit some playoff teams out at us. I just don't know that they're going to be undefeated teams. So I'm going to make that a 9.5 on the boldness scale. And remember, as I have tentatively promised, depending on whether producer Jesse can ship them out or not, anyone who makes a prediction that I label 9.5 or higher and it ends up hitting, I'm going to send you a chalice of supremacy. It's tough, but I'm going to do it. So I need to talk to you about the portal, and then I'm going to have Sark on the show, and it's going to be really, really good. So transfer portal's closed. Portal window's closed, but there's still stuff going on. And I haven't even talked to you since, for example, Dominic Williams, the TCU defensive tackle, committed to, not LSU, but committed to Oklahoma, which prompted a lot of ire from Baton Rouge. But this is a true freshman All-American from last year. 6'2", 320, started every game for TCU, and he's headed to Oklahoma. And Oklahoma needed it for 2 reasons. Number one, they just need big bodies on the interior. Number 2, you've got to make sure folks understand. Forget about outsiders. You got to make sure people in your building and around your program understand, yeah, we're going to the SEC. We're going to blend in the SEC. We're going to do things. We're going to be very aggressive. We're going to go about our business the way they go about business in the SEC. And Brent Venables hasn't shied away from that. Oklahoma hasn't shied away from that. And good on them, because this is a really good addition for them. And it was competitive. It was really competitive. Oregon, not only did they land Peyton Woodyard, who's the DB from Alabama, but Derek Harmon, who was the defensive tackle from Michigan State. And Michigan State's, it's bled some players here. They landed both of them. Oregon, by the way, now with the number 2 transfer portal class in the country after these pickups, Harmon was the top defensive tackle in the portal. And I have talked for, it feels like forever now, about the depth and versatility that Oregon is building on their defensive front, which is unique, and no one else on the West Coast does it to the degree they're doing it. And you've got to do it, because when you talk about going to the playoff or just playing in the Big Ten, and you get into your 15th or 16th game of the year, maybe, your depth chart's not going to look the way it looks in a preview magazine. And you've got to have bodies. You've got to be able to lose a guy or two and still be able to play at a high level, and Oregon is affording themselves that ability. I talked about Indiana earlier in the show. I don't know that we've spoken about them much, but man, I gotta give a little golf clap. We're indoors, so you got to give golf claps indoors. But Curt Cignetti took the job at Indiana, and Curt Cignetti has found a way to overturn a lot of Indiana really quickly. They've had 35 guys leave via the portal. They've had 30 guys come in via the portal. Do you understand, like, what percentage of your roster you just snapped your fingers and overturned? That doesn't guarantee you they'll win a single game this fall. But what it does guarantee is they'll look a lot different, and you hope for the better for any kind of new staff. You hope for the better. It's this totally new concept. Like, they just landed C.J. West. That was a defensive tackle at Kent State. D'Angelo Pons, he was a corner at James Madison. They just brought those guys in. This was not a situation where they're just chilling at home and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door. Hey, can we come play for you? These were competitive recruitments, NIL recruitments or portal recruitments, whatever you want to call them. And I know that anytime this day and age, when guys land players out the portal, if you didn't land them, all you do is say, well, I mean, all you did is go buy them. Okay, well, if it's that easy, you go do it. All right, this is Indiana, by the way. We're not talking basketball either. So for Indiana football to be making any kind of move, it warrants mention on this show. That's all I'll say. Next up, I'm at Texas. Texas has made a move. Javion Cole was a corner from San Jose State, and they just brought him in. You know, they had a guy leave via the portal. They have him come in. Footwork and tackling. First two things that anybody who has watched him play talks about. He was at San Jose State, and that staff left, and now he's come here. He had 7 interceptions the past 2 seasons, and there's no starting spot guaranteed. You know, I've talked to people around here today, for instance, and they say he's going to come in, and we expect him to compete for a starting job. My guess is he'll play a ton for Texas this fall, but I can assure you he's here for the right reasons. And it's just another really good football player that they can be selective with. At Texas, they don't have to operate out of desperation in that portal anymore. They did once upon a time, and the portal was not present like it is now when Sark first got here, which he'll talk about a little later in the show. But that's a big deal for Texas. And also, Miami, they added another one, man. Simeon Barrow, the defensive tackle from Michigan State, which is a theme. Defensive tackles leaving Michigan State. 6'3", 290, 3-year standout as a starter up there. Their 2024 defensive line class in recruiting had 6 blue chippers, but those are high school seniors essentially still. So they're not all ready to just be plug and play. So they needed a bridge body or two to get them to where that class could be plugged in on the 2 deep. And this is a really big move. It's the 5th portal edition for them. They still may not be done. They are totally all in on this season. The energy, the mentality that Miami has about their 2024 year is the same one Ohio State has. It's the same one Ole Miss has. It doesn't mean that we're going all in here and then whatever happens in the future happens in the future. They're building for the future, but they understand whether the public thinks it or not, we got a window to do something really big this year, and we will leave no stone unturned in trying to make sure that we jump right through that window. So portal still pumping out newsworthy items. I would encourage you guys to keep up with that for obvious reasons, but also because if you're in the futures market, if you go to FanDuel right now, like I said earlier in the show, you can go look at Miami. They got the 3rd best odds to win the ACC. Okay, well, if you think Cam Ward is that good, if you think that the Simeon Barrows addition is that impactful, maybe you think you're getting good odds over there. Or maybe you think Miami is all smoke and mirrors and there's nothing to them. You could go bet Miami to miss the college football playoff. They have those odds. I clapped 4 times. That's how much emphasis I want to put on that. You can go bet those odds. You can actually think about the past. It used to just be you can only bet, positively whether a team's going to make the playoff or not. But FanDuel says, hey, there's a lot of hatred in the world. And in sports, that can be a beautiful thing. So if you're a Florida State fan, you despise any time Miami comes out of my mouth and you want to rub it in my face, go bet them to miss the playoff for all I care. So there are a lot of options out there. The futures market this time of year is a beautiful thing. More games of the year are being added. So our friends over at FanDuel, we have, as I've said many times, a lot of exciting things that are coming with them in the fall. But right now, You got it over there as we speak. Just peruse at your leisure. Just peruse. And I think you'll be very, very excited with some of that. All right. I'm excited with what's coming up on the show. So here's the way we do it. We can do the Pate State Speaker Series. We take it on the road. We do a show from campus. And then on the back end of that show, we welcome in the head coach for a long-form, variety-filled sit-down conversation. And earlier today, we sat down with Steve Sarkeesian. I'm going to tell you on the front end, this is lengthy, immunity, but it goes a lot of different directions. And afterwards, the show's over. So I'm wrapping the show before I toss to the interview. I appreciate you guys. If you're a Texas fan, you've never watched the show before, come back and subscribe to the channel and the podcast while you're at it, because it's free. We do college football year round. We don't touch on anything else. So we appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate Texas for having us here today. Thomas and John and the whole staff here have been great. Without further ado, here is our sit down with Texas head coach Steve Sarkeesian. So I'm in Nashville. You're in Austin. You've been here a few years now, and we were just talking before we started about how wild it is when you choose where you want to live. You can live out 30 minutes outside of town, or you can live downtown, and how different the vibe is. And like, you're a city guy. You grew up in LA. Yeah. So, I mean, describe Austin, because there are like 15 high rises here that I don't even remember being here like 5 years ago.
It's been incredible. Like, going in year 4 now, and the growth in this city has been really incredible, whether it's the high rises, whether it's been the food scene, whatever that looks like. I mean, it's pretty awesome. But for me, like, we live about 12, 15 minutes just outside of downtown, so I have that pretty good commute back and forth. I see deer and fox every morning, but then here's downtown Austin and just a vibrant city right now. It's really cool.
And I mean, you're kind of immersed in it, so you don't talk like this, but outside the football complex, when people started saying that, if I was a realtor, I would say all that, and I would say, and you know, Texas football is kind of doing okay as well, which I got to imagine is a nice cherry on top selling point in that community. So I'm going to thank you for them, because they're not in here today.
Well, but I'm thanking them too, because we use the city of Austin recruiting for sure, because we do have a different niche. I mean, how many colleges are in a city of 1 million people with no pro sports? So we don't have any NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball. So we have this awesome city, but yet it's still a college town. And there's not, if any, other places in the country that are that way. So the better Austin's doing, and how vibrant and how electric it is, and how great business is and the economy is, that's better for us too. So I think it's a two-way street for them.
How are you doing? I remember when you got here a few years ago, we had you on the show, and you talked culture then, you talk culture now. Yeah. You got to hammer it home every day. But I remember how much of a work in progress it felt like it was. And I'm not saying you've arrived, because no one's ever arrived on that front. But when you're around Texas now, when you talk to people inside of Texas, when outsiders talk about Texas, the tune's totally changed. And it's not just result oriented. The results have been downstream, I would imagine, of a lot of stuff you guys have rewired internally. Well,
for sure. And sometimes I tap into some of the Nick Sabanisms of his kind of stuff, because it was really impactful on me. But, you know, if you remember him, he always talked about the process. Mm-hmm. And I don't really speak in it in that term, but when you frame the question that way, like, we're not result oriented. You know, the byproduct of a really good culture, the byproduct of recruiting, you know, really well, highly talented kids, the byproduct of never sacrificing character for talent in the people you bring into the organization, you know, the byproduct of really living the adage of who you are some of the time is who you are all of the time. So what does that look like academically? Who are you on our community? The byproduct of that are some of the wins, and some of those wins late, right? That you find a way to win those games because you do have that culture. And so I try to appreciate where we're at, because I think that's one of the things I made a mistake about early in my career as a head coach, was it was always on to the next. So I've been a lot more appreciative of kind of being where my feet are and understanding, man, this has been pretty cool. This has been a great journey, right? From 5-7 to the college football playoff, and what that looked like along the way. So I don't take that stuff for granted. I don't take it lightly. But yet the fire inside him is there's more to go do, right? And I think that's the beauty of what we get to do on a daily basis.
You mentioned something there that is probably more prevalent in the portal era than just the classical recruiting era. You said you cannot sacrifice the principles and integrity of the program for talent.
Right.
And I'm always really interested when coaches talk about this, because you can, like, guys can say that, especially early in their career. Guys could say that in January or February or whatnot. But when it comes time to make a call on a guy that talent-wise could potentially alter the trajectory of your season, but you understand this guy doesn't hit critical factors from the neck-up standpoint, like, you got to make that call.
Sure.
How difficult sometimes is that call when he's got every intangible I need from a physical standpoint, but there's something missing from the neck up?
Well, I think there's a couple things to that. One, we're at a space now in year 4, we don't have to take as many risks. Early on, when you come in and you're 5 and 7, you're probably taking a few more risks. You're probably saying, okay, I see the talent. There might be some marginal character in here, but who else is it? Because we're having a hard time recruiting player X, Y, and Z who have it all, who are all buttoned up. And so you take a few more risks early on. Now in year 4, we don't have to take those risks. And the beauty of not having to take those risks is this. I've got 120 18 to 22-year-old sons on our team. And as great of character as we are, not every one of them are going to, they're going to make some mistakes. I was in college. We were in college. That's the way it goes. And so if you can minimize some of that going into it, I think the better off, because the kids that really, truly expose themselves, that don't have the great character, I don't know if they're going to be the reason why you win a championship. They might help you win a couple games here and there, but they'll surely contribute to the reason of why your program and your culture and your locker room falls apart. And that's how it spreads. It can spread with one person so quickly. So we do our due diligence on that. And I think we can. I think we've earned that now. And so when you make that decision, it's, again, I feel like we don't have to take too big of risks. And that's where my judgment comes in. And my judgment kicks into what is his true character, as opposed to maybe did he make a mistake or two. And that's where you got to kind of draw that line. And then hopefully you know him well enough, you know the family well enough, you know the high school coach well enough to where you can get to the bottom of that to make a consciously good decision.
I was looking back at some of our notes when you first got here about what we were saying on the show about Texas in the spring. And I remembered, I had my memory jogged. There was a time not too long ago where you guys couldn't even do spring games as you wanted because the depth chart was a wreck.
Yeah.
And now this past spring, you guys had one of the most entertaining spring games because you could go at it the way you want to. Can you please, like in layman's terms for the folks at home and me, describe how different the depth is here compared to what you inherited?
Well, just that was year 1, year 2. We couldn't play a spring game. And the reason was I would have 7, maybe 8 offensive linemen total that could physically go compete in a game. This year in spring practice, we had 17 to 19 to 20. I mean, when you start adding up the walk-ons and so on and so forth. So now you can play a real game. And that goes across the board, whether it's having enough receivers, having enough defensive linemen. Now, I think a couple things have contributed to that. One, I think we've structured our roster in a way to where we have equality in depth across the board. It's not just 1 or 2 position groups that are loaded. We've kind of assembled it in a way that is lateral. But 2, I think the portal has helped that, where you can bring some players in mid-year to get yourself in the right space for spring practice. But the other thing that's changed a lot in college football that people aren't talking as much about, more and more kids are graduating high school early. More and more kids are graduating they're signing in December and they're showing up on your campus in January. We had 18 freshmen show up in January who should still be in high school that are now competing in spring practice, that are competing in winter conditioning drills, that are getting a semester of school under their belt, which I think is huge for us. Because as you look ahead into this season and why depth is so important, we're going to play our first game August 31st, which is really early in college football world. The national championship's not till January 20th, and we're not getting that month off. like you would in December because of the college football playoff. You may have to play 16, 17 games. We are going to need all the depth that we can have and to generate, and we're going to have to play young players early to try to be at our best after Thanksgiving.
I think when guys talk about how relentless you have to be in recruiting, it goes over heads sometimes because the general public is used to being conditioned in preview magazine fashion.
Right.
When the preview magazine comes out, everybody's healthy. And your starting 22 look great, and preseason expectations are based on that. But then what you're talking about is by the time week 2 of November is there, there's red Sharpie all throughout that depth chart. And then you add in that you may have to play 1 or 2 games on top of what you used to have to play to win a title. You can't forecast injury, but like how relentless and like how up late at night do you have to be sometimes mentally to make sure we are stocked at these positions, knowing the inevitable is coming, but not knowing where it's coming?
Well, I think that, and I think the other thing is making sure that you're versatile enough. Twofold, are you recruiting versatile enough players, guys that can play multiple positions, so that you can get your best players on the field, whether it's in the secondary, on the defensive line front, your tight ends, things of that nature. And then 2, are you versatile enough schematically as a staff to utilize the personnel that is available to you in December? Because it's not going to be the same as it was in August. And so the idea that maybe we need to be in more 12 personnel, or maybe we need to be in more 2-back, or maybe we need to be in more 11, or maybe we just need to play nickel and dime on defense and base defense is out the window, or all our DBs are shot. Do you have the ability to play more base defense, even versus some of the 11 personnel stuff? Like we have to be versatile that way as a staff, and we can't just get versatile in November and December. We have to prepare our players for that stuff in August as we're going through training camp to get ready, so that if we have to go down a different road, they've been exposed to it. You know, maybe I've got a Jade Barron who plays nickel for us. I need him to play corner or safety. Well, we need to expose him to those things in training camp so that if we do that, he's comfortable enough to do it.
Do you think you'll ever have a better quarterback situation going forward than you have right now, where folks are terrified elsewhere in the country that if they're first off, their guy may not be good enough, but if their guy goes down, they're screwed. And you're sitting here with Arch Manning, you got a good quarterback room, and yeah. I've been able to describe you that way multiple years now. How sweet is that? It's
awesome. It's the most difficult and the most important position in sports for a reason, right? You just think about the great teams. Very few great teams have won championships, NFL, college, high school. We've been covering this sport forever, that didn't have a really good quarterback. And he may not always be the most talented, but he was the leader, or he was the toughest, or he was the guy that everyone could count on. Like that position encompasses so much that we recruit it that way. We recruit it as if it's the most important position, and it's not always about the talent. It's not, playing quarterback and being a great quarterback is not about how far you throw it or how well you throw a slant route. That's a piece to the puzzle. What type of leader are you? What type of work ethic do you have? How do you relate to everybody in that locker room? How do you relate to your community? Do you instill belief in every person in our building when we go take the field that we are going to win this game? That's what the greatest quarterbacks have. And that's what we try to look for in recruiting, and then that's what we try to develop when we get them here. And we've had a decent amount of success over the years, and I think this is another great room. I mean, having Quinn back for his 3rd year is huge. Watching his growth and maturation over 3 years has been incredible. Just looking at Arch from year 1 to year 2 and to see how far he's come. And then we've got a young player in Trey Owens who we think is going to be a really good player as well. So we like the room. You knock on wood. You hope you don't have to go to all those guys that on the depth chart. But a year ago we did, and we were able to find a way to win a couple games with a backup quarterback starting.
Go back last year, really the last 2 years, you guys played Bama in a home and home.
Yep.
And we're at both games. Electric atmospheres both times. Close game here, it goes their way. But then you go there a year later, and they don't hand you a trophy for a regular season win. But, I mean, I remember talking to Josh Heupel about when they beat them at Tennessee a couple of years ago and how seminal a moment it was for the energy of the fan base and for the messaging of how we can sell our program. There's no more projecting. We're showing you, like, we can do it. We can take down the best of the best. From that standpoint, what kind of effect did that win on the road last year have on just the organization and then the broader scope of Texas football overall?
Well, I think it was big. I had to put it into perspective for some of our players even to think when we went in there that night, they were 52-1 in their previous 53 games at home under Coach Saban, and the only loss was to Joe Burrow and LSU, the national champion, and I was on that sideline with Alabama. To think Nick Saban's never gotten beat at home by double digits in 18 years until that game. To think that was the first non-conference team to go in there and beat them in over a decade. So there was a lot of, like, to put it into perspective for our players, I think was huge. But more importantly, I think for us, I think over the last decade and a half, there's been some great teams that have come into DKR, and Texas has played them well and won, their fair share. But to go on the road into the SEC, where we're headed, to play the team that has dominated that conference over the last 2 decades, and to go win that game in that fashion, and also because I think it was important too. That's where I had come from, and that the fact of this is what we were trying to build to go compete with those teams. Before we even knew we were going to the SEC, we said we had to build a team that could beat Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, Notre Dame, the teams that are historically in the college football playoff. And the fact that we could assemble a team that could go on the road in a hostile environment at night in Tuscaloosa, beat that team. And then I laugh when everyone said, well, it's not the same Alabama anymore. Well, they were in the college football playoff again and were a play away from playing for another national championship. So, year in and year out, that's the consistency that Coach Saban had gotten that program to. That's obviously what we're striving for. But I think it was a great check mark on our journey for a lot of people to look back at that game. It was like, okay, now we've assembled the team, the culture that can go achieve that. Now how do we find that level of consistency to do it year in and year out?
What was your immediate reaction when you heard about Nick Saban's retirement?
That was a wild day. I can't remember the order, but it was Nick Saban and Pete Carroll on the same day.
Yeah, sure was.
And for me, those were two men that completely impacted not only my coaching career, but me as a man. I had worked for Pete Carroll for 7 years. And he really got me into the industry. I GA'd for him, and then I kind of worked my way up with him. And then Coach Saban, when I was out of work, him extended an olive branch to me to get me back into it as an analyst, brought me back as a coordinator. So both those guys were really impactful to me, and so. I don't want to say I wasn't surprised, because I know Coach Saban doesn't do anything on a whim, right? He's a thoughtful man, and neither of those guys. And so when it occurred, he just felt like it was the time. It was still hard to kind of chew on. Even today, I'll be honest with you, it's hard to kind of chew on that. And I love Kalen. Kalen's an awesome coach, and he's done a fantastic job. But it not being the straw hat at practice for Alabama is, I think, going to take time for everybody. And so, but love him to death. I know he's doing great. I talk to him, quite, periodically, and still bounce ideas off him. He's still the GOAT in my opinion. So, but I know he's doing great, and it was fun to watch him doing the NFL draft. He just looks so relaxed,
like he's done it before,
like he's been doing it his whole life. I'm like, this guy, but that's him. He's always going to work at his craft to be the best at what he does.
I'll be interested if you think this way. So he had a really big voice in the room for head coaches, period, especially SEC coaches. And I'm not saying that he won't, but he's no longer an active head coach. And so, like, when you guys are on coaches' meetings, when you're in Destin later this month, when you're talking about pressing matters at hand, that voice that used to be the one everyone's kind of looking to the left or right waiting to speak up may not be there anymore. And you got a full plate running Texas football. Do you view your role as being at one of the major programs to speak above and beyond Texas, like to speak for the betterment of college athletics, or can you even afford to spend time on that?
I guess that's a fine line there. I love college football, and I mean that, and I've never wavered off of that. Like, we have an awesome sport, and we have a sport that captivates our country, not just every Saturday, but for months at a time. And there's so much pride in what we do, and the regular season matters, and it counts, and the fan bases. It's an incredible sport, and to me, it's at an all-time high right now. I mean, what people are loving about college football, the ratings, it's incredible. And I know we've got a lot of moving parts right now, and whether it's the portal, conference realignment, NIL, whatever, all the stuff that's potential revenue sharing. What is all this going to look like? But in the end, we still have an amazing sport. And that's my big thing of, like, everybody's going to complain. One side's going to complain, the other side's going to complain. I try to get back to, hey, we got it pretty good. Yeah, we've got it pretty good right now. And so I try to look at it from a 10,000-foot view as much as I can. And then where are we in that? And then how does that affect the University of Texas? And how do I kind of do both? But Coach Saban was great at that. I always say, he looked at it from a 10,000-foot view, but the Crimson Tide was on his mind, everything that he was suggesting, in the end. And I think Kirby has gotten into that space now. He's earned that. He's done a great job, and what he's done at Georgia. I think Brian Kelly in our own conference, because of his experience and how long he's been doing it. So there's a lot of coaches, and everybody's perspective is different. Lane's perspective is totally different at an Ole Miss as compared to where Brian Kelly's is at LSU, or mine for that matter, or Kirby's. Kalen DeBoer's perspective is going to be totally different now, having now just getting to Alabama. So I think those ideas, and there's a lot of smart people in that room for us, sharing those ideas and then getting to a common ground where we're like, okay, this is in the best interest of college football. Sometimes it's not always in the best interest of Texas, but it's in the best interest of college football. So let's move forward with that. There's other times you stand on that hill and you fight for the thing that you believe in, because I really don't want to give that up. And so that's the beauty of being in the Southeastern Conference and Commissioner Sankey and his leadership, but also the men in that room as coaches and the expertise that they have.
I think about when you were at Bama and where you are now, and not that there's a lot of historical precedent, because no one has your exact story.
Right.
But historically, let's just say broad strokes purposes, someone is taking the path that you took.
Right.
Typically, there would be a stop between Bama and Texas, maybe like a G5 head coaching job,
right,
maybe a lower level P4 now coaching job. But you went Bama to Texas, and then the entire sport changed. And now I look at the plight of G5 head coaches, where the better they do, the more likely maybe their roster is to get raided post-spring.
Right.
Like, there's nothing they can do about it.
Know.
And you just throw your hands up. I mean, you're in one of the most blessed positions in college football, not just because you get to do what you love, but you get to do what you love at one of the premier programs in America. Do you ever, I know you talk to some of them, but do you ever think, man, how would my operation and approach have to be different if I was on this rung of the ladder instead of the rung I'm on?
No doubt. I got the job here and college football started to change.
Boom.
I remember thinking to myself, after when I first got here, we didn't have the portal, the transfer portal. I'm like, man, that would have been nice to have had. We went into the season undernumbered of scholarships. We just didn't, because we couldn't replenish.
At Texas.
Yeah, we couldn't replenish because so many guys had left and declared for the draft and transferred. And then they were capping you at 25. I couldn't bring in enough players. I was just reflecting on that. That would have been a lot nicer if I had that. But also I shift gears and I do talk to buddies of mine that are coaches at those places. And the idea that year in and year out, they're on a ladder of, okay, here's 2, 4, 6 of my better players that are literally getting recruited off my team from other schools because, allegedly people don't pre-portal, right? But the reality is that's what's happening. Okay, so how do they then manage, all right, there they go, recruiting high school, but then they're looking to of maybe who's on our rosters at this level of guys that want the opportunity to play. I think that's important too. It's like we've all got pretty good players. Only so many of them can play. And now as guys get a little older, junior, seniors, they're just looking for an opportunity to put good film out there so they can have an opportunity to go play in the National Football League. And so they're monitoring that too. And so everybody's looking at everybody else. And my biggest thing is like, that's important, it is. But man, we got to make sure that we're looking internally too. And how we're developing our players here too. How we're treating our players here, not only on the field, but off the field. How we're developing them. Because we want to make it as hard as possible for our guys to want to leave. That they're getting developed, they're getting treated well enough, they're getting coached up, they're playing in great schemes, they've got a great locker room culture, they're getting a first-class education, they get to live in the city of Austin. Like, I want to make it so dang hard for them to leave that if that moment comes where they feel like that's just in the best interest that for me to go, that it should almost bring them to tears that, you know, this place meant that much to them.
Do you ever, when that happens, when a guy leaves, and then you're in your office, you shut the door behind you, it's just you. If I were you, I would probably speak ill of someone. Or I would think, how can you not get this? Like, I would want to grab someone by the shoulders and I want to shake them and say, like, how do you not get this? Because you've lived in this game for a long time.
Yeah.
I've immersed myself in it for a long time. You know what a have looks like, you know what the have-nots look like.
Yeah.
And maybe a 17 or 18-year-old doesn't always, because they haven't been around the block. But when you see what a place like Texas affords you,
right,
or what a place like Georgia or Bama or Ohio State affords you, and then you think, dude, to look at all that and to say, nah, no thanks, I'm good, I'm going to go somewhere else. You've done all you can do. Like, there's nothing else you can do. But do you just sometimes think, like, are you serious?
Well, you know, a couple things is we live in a society of instant gratification, okay? And social media hasn't made that any better. It kind of escalated that. It's like, you know, I want to buy something, I go on Amazon and I order it, you know, or I go to Instacart, I go to one of these apps, I can just, you know, DoorDash and Uber Eats, like, you know, I need to get somewhere, no longer do you have to call a buddy for a ride because I don't have my car, I call Uber, you know, I call Lyft or whomever it is. And so it's like that's our world. And unfortunately, we inherit the kids that grew up in this world now, and they all want to play. Nobody is disagreeing with you wanting to play, but whether it's our program, any other one, nobody's going to give you playing time. You earn that playing time. And sometimes that playing time doesn't get earned until year 2, year 3, maybe even year 4. But there's this idea of what we've lost, in my opinion, as a society is the ability to persevere when things aren't going your way. And then through hard work, through mental toughness, through some resiliency, you work towards it. And then it's even more gratifying when you do get that. And the easy one is Mac Jones. I mean, what he did at Alabama for 3 years to get his one shot, nobody was more grateful for that opportunity than Mac Jones because of the work that he put in. But how many quarterbacks nowadays are going to sit around and wait for 3 years before they get their chance to play their 4th year of college? It doesn't happen, right? And I get a chuckle out of this. Everyone's praising Arch for staying at Texas. He's going into year 2. Like, what do you mean?
What a veteran, man.
But that's the mentality and our locker room's not a whole lot different than everybody else's. But that's the mentality. Good for Arch. He's sticking it out with Texas in year 2, and I'm like, yeah, that's part of the process. Like, we're developing him to be a great football player and a great leader, and he's going to be. But that's where we're at right now, you know. And so I think that's a little bit unfortunate, but you know, it is what it is. Like, you know, Coach Saban's got the greatest line ever: adapt or die. Yeah. There's a reason dinosaurs aren't on the earth anymore. They couldn't adapt. And so we've continually had to adapt in the way we talk to our players, the way we develop them, the way we try to find them opportunities to play and find niches that they can do to get them on the field. But I'm never going to back off of trying to develop them as men. And if we don't learn the value of perseverance here, how are we going to do it in the real world? You know, what's going to happen when the chips are against you in the real world? You can't transfer in the real world. You gotta work your way through it. You gotta show some resiliency. You gotta put forth a little bit more extra. You gotta be a little bit more disciplined. You gotta be a little bit more committed to whatever that cause is. And so there is no transfer portal in the real world, right? And I'm not saying that transfer portal's bad. Hey, it's helped the University of Texas. I'll be honest with you. I'll be the first one to tell you. But we can't just rely on that as that's the out. And let's make sure we're exhausting ourselves before we say, all right, the portal, coach, it's time for me to go. And then I can close my door in my office and sit there and say, hey, you know what? We did everything we could for him, and this was in his best interest to move on and to find a new home.
Here's what sucks in my space. So if I try and say that, I get accused of being anti-player because people hear what they want to hear instead of what you say. Like you can be in two truths at one time. You can be pro ability for guys to move, but also pro them using it as a last resort, but that's got to be on them. You're kind of basically, you're doing the same thing I'm doing right now, and that you're giving opinion on the way you hope guys are wired mentally, while also saying, but if you're not, there's the water slide, you can hop on it, you go wherever it takes you. I don't know if you've noticed this, but it seems to me there are a lot of people in the space right now with a lot of ulterior motives, and some are on the NIL side of the fence, maybe profiting from it, and some are just moonlighting as agents, even though they're not accredited by anyone. And so it's in their best interest to just continue to take a baseball bat to the beehive. And then you've got voices saying what you're trying to say, and sometimes I try and echo that same sentiment, and you can't even get the sentence out of your mouth without someone saying, you saying players shouldn't have those rights? No one's saying that.
Right.
So that's what I deal with. It's kind of a little commentary.
But the thing is, it's like, as we're moving, as college football and college athletics are shifting and changing, and it's all happening, sometimes we need to lean into the people that have been the experts in this space for decades. Professional sports in a lot of ways has figured a lot of this stuff out. And sometimes, if we want to minimize, the guys as moonlighting as agents, well, let's only deal with accredited agents, right? If you're not an accredited agent through any professional sport, whether it's the NFL, Major League Baseball, then you can't speak on a player's behalf in college. Have we ever thought about that? No, because we're still playing catch up. We're still trying to get the lay of the land here. But that's just one simple thing. It's like we have got to start to settle our feet down, and we will. And college football, change is a good thing, as long as we make the necessary adjustments and get this thing right. And so whether it's the portal, whether it's NIL, whether it's conference realignment, whether it becomes revenue sharing, we're going through this thing together. And hopefully that we've got people in place, which I believe that we do, that in great leadership to navigate us through it and then settle this all down to say, okay, this is the direction we're going in. I want what's best for our players, and they work their tail off, and the opportunities that they're getting, I'm super excited for them. But there's also other opportunities that don't have a monetary value on them that I think college football offers them that's going to help them in life. And there is no value to put on that, right? It's what I got as a player. I mean, I played for Lavelle Edwards. Those 2 years I had at BYU with him were priceless to me. That helped shape me for what I've become. And I think we all could speak to coaches that we've had and experiences in college that we've had, teammates that we've had that impact us. And so that's above and beyond just a value of NIL or playing time, because I think we learn a lot about ourselves through adversity. And so hopefully as we get in this and as we navigate through it, we get to a space where everybody's comfortable. Not everybody has to be happy, as long as everybody's comfortable with the space that we're in college athletics.
Are you familiar with what a gas station recruiting war is?
No.
No, that's good.
I feel like I don't do that. I don't know. I don't know. I've never.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you.
I would know it probably if that was something I did.
Well, I was going to ask you, so you're in the state of Texas. So depending on like the portion of the country you're in, there are places that are big deals. Like Buc-ee's is a really big deal in Texas.
Yeah, big deal.
But do you ever actually get to go in one? Because that would be a scene if you walked into one.
I stopped at one last week. I was driving back from Houston, and I stopped at Buc-ee's. I didn't get anything, though. I just kind of walked in real quick and I looked around because I had never been at this particular Buc-ee's, and it's fascinating. I mean, just massive. And then I got back in my car and I kept trucking.
Which brings me to my next point. So I'm currently finding myself in about an 8-way bidding war in my own gas station recruiting battle. I'm going to partner with one of these brands this fall. And every other big voice at the table, and Buc-ee's has been MIA. And I don't get it because I'm very loyal to them, or have been in the past. And so any advice on handling my recruitment when I don't have one offer that I would love to have on the table would be very much appreciated.
Well, but I think about this from a player's perspective, right? Let's call it we're the University of Texas, and I only get to sign, 25 players a year. And in the state of Texas, there's hundreds of players that are going to go play Division I football or football in general at various universities. And so now I've got coaches out spring recruiting. And there's the kid, he's a really good player. We know he's a good player, but we're trying to figure out, are we going to offer him or not? Like, how do we go through it? And then inevitably we do because, okay, it's the right fit, but now the kid's upset with us because it took us too long. Because everybody else is just, oh, he's a kid in Texas, he must be good, go offer him. But there's no substance behind the offer, right? And then when you do go to commit to that school, and then they tell you can't commit because that wasn't a committable offer, right? So what kind of offer do you want from Buc-ee's, right?
You think they may give me the non-committable?
They could very easily, just to get in the game, and then let's feel it out. So you got to figure that out.
And there's no coming back from that.
Our offers that come from me are committable. And so now who's offering you that? You know, that's the thing you got to figure out. Who at Buc-ee's is offering you?
So I may need to dance with a girl that was there with me at the beginning.
I think there might be something to be said for that. Or make sure you're getting the right type of offer.
This is deep. This is really deep. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, a couple more things here
You got it.
that we're going to get right back on the track of football with. When you guys go to the playoff last year, a lot of people are experiencing that for the first time in your organization. You had been there before. How much of a learning process is that for your players, your people in your organization? And it didn't go the way you wanted it to on the field, but how much better equipped do you feel like you are in the future because you've been through that whole thing?
Well, I think if it nothing else, we tasted it. And everybody, it was so good, they want it again. And so it really is serving as an awesome piece of motivation throughout the winter, throughout spring ball, heading into summer. Because it didn't go the way we wanted to, and because we were so close, I think it served as great motivation. The same way maybe the Bama game served from 2 years ago. Wait, that was Alabama, and we lost on a last-second field goal. Let's keep doing what Coach is talking about, and then let's try to take the next step. And so I think it's been part of the progression as the program, as we've grown from year to year to year. Yeah, that stung and it hurt to walk off the field, New Orleans not winning. But I think what's come out of it, we've got a really hungry football team that wants to get back to that stage and see if they can overcome that.
Everyone is going to be talking about you guys and OU going to the SEC, but they're talking about it at like 50,000 feet. Right. Oh, how great it's going to be. Oh, how amazing it's going to be, which I agree with. But when you get into the weeds of like the practical things that go along with that, what is it, if anything, that you specifically have to focus on? Or is it just, we're going to play the teams on our schedule, let's go?
Well, I think one of the challenges is, beyond just the schedule, it's getting to know the rosters, getting to know the coaching staffs. You get into the routine in your conference, being in the Big 12 of, okay, there's Matt Campbell, there's their style of defense. Okay, there's Coach Dykes, there's Dave Aranda, right? There's Coach Kleiman, there's Coach Leipold, and then their style, and you get to know them. When you transition to a new conference, there's a lot of information that we've got to wrap our brain around and get a lay of the land of, to help us prepare, right? In training camp, what are we going to have to get prepared to play against when the season rolls around? that's probably the biggest shift, right? Of getting acclimated to maybe they're not on the schedule, but we might play Ole Miss. So what is Lane's offense looking like in P. Golding? Or we're not playing LSU, but what is Brian Kelly doing at LSU, or Josh Heupel at Tennessee? So you're looking at your own schedule, but then if you can make it to that game, of just making sure you're preparing your team. Schematically, that's one thing. I think recruiting is a whole nother thing, right? Because where our niche was in Texas and in and around Texas, and maybe a little into Louisiana. Now being the Southeastern Conference, now we're sweeping all the way across, right? I-10 and take you over there. And so you have to adjust some of that too, because not only do we want to recruit our great state of Texas, it's critical to our success, and now nobody can say, why would you go to Texas? You have to play in the Big 12, right? So we kind of get that back. But we also now can broaden our stroke a little bit to the Southeast, which I think is good for us.
So when we come out of spring here, a lot of coaches are on the road as we speak right now recruiting. You're doing the speaking engagement circuit, but eventually summer workouts and then fall camp gets here.
Yeah.
What did you guys exit spring with the biggest red Sharpie circle focus on, of saying this right here, that right there, like that's probably going to decide whether we get where we want to go this fall or not?
Well, I think the biggest one is when you lose those two defensive linemen and then the interior of your front with Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat. How do you replace? And I think one thing that we've come out of it saying, okay, we've got a couple high-level players, but we don't have to replace them with just two players.
Right.
That I think our depth is really important. And so that was something that we tried to attack in the portal, just to solidify the depth of playing more people and not having to rely on just those two. But I think we've got some players that are ready to develop. Neither of those two guys had ever started a game until last season either. And so the fact that we've got some young players in our program that are growing up, I love where Alfred Collins is at, Vernon Broughton, what they can do, and some of the growth of our other players. So that was one area. And then on the offensive side of the ball, we lost 3 NFL receivers, right, and an NFL tight end. And so getting that continuity back for Quinn, whether, again, it was in the transfer portal with Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, whether it's with the 3 young players that we had that were the only returning scholarship receivers in Jonte Cook, Ryan Niblett, DeAndre Moore, or the high school ranked kids and Ryan Wingo, guys of that nature. So we've got to get that continuity at an all-time high, because that's what's going to be needed in those big games that's going to come down to. The precision has got to be critical in the passing game, and you've got to be able to create those explosive plays. And I think that was part of the reason why we beat Alabama, but I think that was also part of the reason we lost to Washington. Washington hit those big plays against us. We didn't hit enough of them against them.
Final question. It's still several months away, but how many people are going to hit you up that weekend Georgia comes here and you got the F1 race here?
Yeah.
How many favors will be called in that weekend?
I'm sure plenty, but my thing is this. My first question is, do you have a hotel room? Because if you don't have a hotel room, you can't come to the game anyway. I don't know where you're going to go. And so it's obviously a great weekend in Austin that weekend. It's going to be pretty electric. The thing for us, which will be different, we have the Red River Showdown the week before against OU.
Yeah.
So we're going right from Dallas and the State Fair and all that game entails right back to Austin for Georgia the next week in the F1 race and all that's going to be going on in Austin. So there's a lot of things happening in and around that. But that's the beauty of now the SEC, and that's the challenge that you get to have in this conference week in and week out, and that's where the depth is so critical.
I said last thing. This is the last thing for real. At the OU-Texas game, you're in the locker room at halftime, but if you've got a field media pass, that place is so perfectly configured that you can watch the first half. You can run up that ramp that goes outside. You can go funnel cake. You can go some fair games. You can get back in there in time for the third quarter. And you were talking about how great college football is earlier. You're right, because there's no other place on earth that you could do that.
To me, and I've been part of some great games.
It's awesome.
And I have. There's no better game than Texas OU at the Cotton Bowl, the State Fair. It is incredible. And for anybody who's never been to that game, you need to go to that game.
Yes.
It is incredible.
Perfect cap. Coach, we appreciate it,
Alrighty.
man.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank
See
you.
you, buddy.